Hello beautiful people, my name is Kylie. Before I start, I'd like to give a warning that content in this video may be triggering for some people. I'm going to talk about the tools I used to overcome my dysfunctional childhood. First, I'll paint a picture of my relationship with my stepmother and family, followed by a discussion of the tools and concepts I used to overcome the adverse effects of growing up in such an environment, before talking about my unexpectedly emotional reaction to my stepmother's recent death. My stepmother was the only mother I knew from about the age of 1, and my father later told me that his wife warned him right at the beginning that she did not want his children and she would never love his children. And within months of my new life, I had been hospitalised with broken bones after being hurled against a wall in a fit of rage. Now, those fits of rage were to be a daily occurrence for me. My new stepmother hated me and she tried everything in her power to break my spirit. Not only with the physical beatings, but she emotionally tormented me as well by constantly telling me things like, I am nothing but a bit of dirt and I belong in the gutter. She also tried to ostracize me from my whole family. She hated seeing me spend any time with my father, and if she ever caught me on his lap having a cuddle, she would pull me off on the premise of doing some chore and she would put one of her own daughters on my dad's lap to have a cuddle. She also encouraged her own children to hate me, which created a really frightening environment for me because my siblings often relished in getting me into trouble so they could watch me get a beating. I was constantly on guard. And of course, I never understood as a little girl why my mother hated me so much. But everybody could see what was going on and nobody did anything about it. So I was just left to accept that this was my normal. Until one day, my stepmother had clearly had enough, screaming at me to get out of her house and out of her life. And my father, in his own poor me state, just let it happen. After the age of 13, I lived with probably more than a dozen families by the time I finished school at 18. When I was 16, my homelessness took me more than 150 kilometres away from my community, and it was then that I realised I was completely alone in this world. And I cried an ocean of tears for my situation. I was completely and utterly broken. But in that moment, I realised 3 things. First, I didn't want my past to determine my future. And second, I didn't want to live with hate in my heart. And third, I only wanted to move forward with love in my heart. Now, in order to do this, I read loads of books on psychology, science, religion, self-help, spirituality, and I travelled the world for 5 years doing a lot of spiritual work. My stepmother continued to be in my life because I was still trying to have a relationship with my father. And while she could no longer beat me, she still absolutely tried to break my soul. She was cunning, manipulating, and cutting with her words. And it didn't matter how strong I had become in the outside world, every single time I went back to the family home, I turned into that frightened little girl again. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with difficult family dynamics, but no human being can change another human being. If we want something to change, we must change ourselves. I knew that my stepmother was never going to change, so I had to find a way to not let her affect me so much. So taking bits and pieces from different things I had learned, I was able to find ways to process my trauma. It is only in the processing of trauma that we recover from trauma. If we can't process our experiences, they just go round and round in our head, causing all sorts of chaos in our lives. Everything I did was trying to recover from my dysfunctional childhood. And there were 4 major concepts that I used. First, to live with love in my heart. This prevented me from projecting any hate and bitterness out into the world. It also meant that I had to learn to love myself as much as I learned to love the world around me. I had to learn to be vulnerable, and I had to learn to trust again. Practicing love strengthened my compassion and kindness, not only towards others, but towards myself as well. Love is the foundation of everything I do, because I wouldn't want anyone to ever feel as worthless as I did. The second major concept I practiced was understanding that while we may not have any control over what the world deals us, we absolutely do have control on how we deal with the world. And so this led me to investigate how I react to the world. And what I discovered was that my reactions were actually a reflection of how I was judging not only other people and situations, but myself as well. And so that led me to practice being non-judgmental. And I found that when I didn't judge others or situations as good, bad, right, or wrong, I was able to understand that everything just is what it is. I can either do something about it or I can't. And understanding this actually created a huge sense of calm and serenity in my world. So understanding that I could control how I react to the world led me to understand that in everything I had choice. My third practice, the power of choice. Now, granted, sometimes I felt my choices were limited or that I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I still had choice. And with this mindset, I couldn't blame anyone for anything. So knowing that my choices led me to be completely accountable for my own life, believe it or not, was incredibly empowering and liberating. And the fourth major concept I practiced was the power of being present. When I was being present, the past wasn't determining my future, and the future wasn't something I was worrying about. I was free to be me in every moment. When I'm present, I can always live with love in my heart. So practicing these four major concepts allowed me to let go of the records of the past that were telling me that I was unlovable and unworthy, and I slowly started to move out of survival mode and become more balanced. And the more balanced I became, the more I was able to look beyond myself into the universal whole. And while I'm not a religious person, I have come to understand that God, or our creative source, is all loving. And if I come from and return to this all loving source, it goes to say that I am part of this all loving source, even now as I reside in my human body. As an all loving source, then, not of this world, my source or my soul is in this body to experience this world. I now believe that everything is just an experience. For me then, what this means is that every human being is a divine source living in a human body with the same goal, even my stepmother. And seeing her as another divine soul, I was able to understand that she's on her own path, doing her own shit. And the crossing of our paths created different experiences for each of us. In my stepmother, I definitely learned how not to be. And my dysfunctional childhood led me down a spiritual path that I'm very grateful for, because after 35 years of soul searching, I have finally reached a place where I absolutely 100% believe in myself just the way I am. And that's how I not let another human being affect me with their words and actions, by believing in myself. I don't need to take on anyone else's shit. They're on their own path. In this way, then, it didn't matter what my stepmother said or did, she no longer had an impact on me. So when I found out about her sudden death and I cried like a baby, I had to ask myself, what in the world is going on? And after crying for nearly a week, I finally realized that it was my body's way of releasing all the fear and terror that it had held onto my whole life. It was like every single cell in my body was saying, thank fuck, she can no longer hurt us again. So I just let my body release the fear. I still needed closure, and I needed to see that she was dead and buried. So after everybody left the funeral service, I approached the grave and I watched the grave dig up all the dirt back over her coffin. And I laid one white flower on her site and I said a little prayer, knowing that one tortured soul here on earth had returned to the all-loving source. It was cathartic, and I'm glad I did it. I now realize that everything leading up to this point has taught me how to love deeply and unconditionally. And we are now in a time in human evolution where the only thing we need to move forward is love into our 5D reality. Remember, beautiful people, we are all divine souls living in a human body. Embrace your divinity and shine, baby, shine, because this crazy world needs your love.